So hello again. I'm back here 4 years later to ask for your votes again and your support. I'll start by telling you what my website is because I always forget that in the heat of the moment at the end of my presentation. It's simply cliffnewell.com. I'm here asking you for your votes, not because I'm currently the district attorney, not because I believe I've served well for the last 12 years. I don't take that for granted. I'm here each and every time, even when I didn't run a campaign, to be and in 2010 I didn't have an opponent, but I was at all of these meetings to present myself and let the community know what I am, who I'm about, and that hasn't changed. What has changed in my office is we've steadily grown since I took office in 2006. We've gone through some growing pains. We've moved buildings a couple times. We've ultimately purchased the building we're in. Saved our county several millions of dollars over the course of time where we're not renting. I continue to establish, growing the office forward with the staff that I hire. We have a bunch of young, energetic, bright prosecutors that are very earnest about what they do. They work very hard for you. I've managed our business through good times and through bad times. We've had some serious economic downturns. And I've been a good steward of your money. Every single year of my administration, I've come in on or under my budget amount. And I do that, I say that because I think that's important. That's one of the important parts about a leader in the local government is we're where the rubber hits the road. We've got your tax dollars at work. And I try to spend those every time I make an expenditure, every time I try to purchase a case management system, every time we go out for bid on some sort of law enforcement aspect for guns, radios, cars, whatever it is, I'm always looking for the right deal to spend your money wisely. And at the end, if I don't have it, I don't try to hurry up and use it. It goes back into my general fund allocations. I think that's important to know. Recidivism is continuing down in Nevada County. In 2016, by the FBI statistics, the last full year of statistics have come out, we're one of 9 counties in California that have a decreasing crime rate, not an increasing crime rate. And I think that's also important to know. We've had some very visible crime, but it's mostly low-level type quality of life crimes. And for those, there's no easy solution because there's substance abuse issues that lead to that. There's homeless issues that lead to that. Those homeless aren't necessarily criminal, but there's a certain demographic that kind of overlap. They're homeless because they have substance abuse issues or mental health issues. And we've developed programs during my tenure to deal with those very specific issues. We have a very robust mental health court where we have opportunity to give individuals a hand up, not a hand out. We hang a prison sentence or a long jail sentence over their head, and we allow them to come back into the fold, become good citizens, and be productive members of our community again. Because as we see, it doesn't do any good just to put them in jail. Then they're back out. Before they hit the corner, they're back to a bar or back to their homeless camp, and they're getting arrested again days later. We have a similar problem with alcoholism, and we have a robust DUI court. I checked the statistics on our DUIs in Nevada County last week. And for the last full year, we had about 540 DUIs. It used to be 750 to 850 DUIs. And those are not just what I'm doing, but it's what I'm doing with other community leaders. It's the programs we put together, and that's the other part that makes me the better person for the job. I've developed these relationships. I've worked very hard for the last 10 or 12 years to get to know the other community leaders, the people in behavioral health, the people in CORE and Common Goals, people at the CEO's office, the various supervisors, so we can, in the probation department, public defender's office, because we all have to work together to solve these problems. Sue brought up the homeless problem. It's a hard problem to solve, and there's no one easy solution, but you have to hit it from every angle. And if you can't work well with the other community leaders and have good relationships and a good rapport with those people to help develop these programs, you're lost. And it's becoming even more important as you see what Sacramento has done to us in the criminal justice system over the last, since 2011 essentially, with AB 109 and then Prop 47 And then we have Prop 57. Sacramento keeps throwing rules at us that don't allow us to incarcerate people. They're not allowing us to send people to prison anymore in certain cases. So we have to, excuse me for a moment, get wound up here on my soapbox. We have to develop programs to handle them locally because we don't have a choice. We can't send them to prison. So what we have to do is figure out some way to reintegrate these people into the community and maintain what my primary goal is, which is public safety. That is my primary mandate. All the other stuff aside, my bottom line is, in everything I do and everything I have done every single day of my life for the last 20 years essentially, is based on, will this make my community a safer place? Will this resolution that I do have some positive outcome for both the individual as well as our community? And if I think I continue to do that, I will continue to be successful. Our community will continue to have decreasing crime rates. We'll start making some inroads into the homeless issue and the mental health issues we have. I'm working closely with the jail at this time, as well as the Public Defender's Office and Probation Department, to identify people who, but for their mental illness, would not be put into the jail. It's, you know, a parent calls and says, my child's off their meds, they're going a little crazy, can you come out there and help me? The cop comes out, they get in a fight with a kid, and then suddenly he's arrested for resisting arrest. Well, was that a criminal act? Yeah, you're supposed to cooperate with a law enforcement officer, but if you're mentally ill and you're confronted by a law enforcement officer, it can go south really quick. Those are the type of things we're now recognizing, and Alex Gamelgard at Grass Valley has been at the lead, getting all of his officers trained in crisis intervention training. He's sending other officers in flights back to 40 hours of training at the post level. The sheriff's doing the same thing, as is Nevada City. And then we have some local groups through behavioral health and NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness, putting on training. So these officers are learning how, when they come into a volatile situation like that and they're addressing a mentally ill person, it doesn't end up with them in jail. And then I've cooperated with Alex Gamelgard now on the real low-level drug crimes, where with a new change in the law now, we can't convict them. We have to give them a program before we convict them. We used to convict them, then put them in a program. If they failed, then the conviction stood. But it's changed now with the advent of the Sacramento. It's told us a better way to do it, which isn't always the case with Sacramento Speaks from personal experience. But what we're doing now is, rather than Alex arresting somebody for a low-level crime that we can't get a conviction on, he's going to take them straight over to a treatment facility and put them right straight into treatment. It's an innovative, and it addresses the problem immediately, and it kind of keeps the crime rate statistics down in a good way, because oftentimes if you hit these people when they're very lowest, it's the time to initiate treatment with them, and they're more receptive when you get them at that point. So really what we have going into the future is trying to counteract those propositions that we've all seen come through over the last several years, especially 47. It took all the felony cases. It used to be cases we could charge as felonies, reduced them to misdemeanors. And AB 109 took a whole group of people that we used to be able to send to state prison when they would offend and offend and offend. We'd get tired of them. We'd finally send them to state prison as a sanction, but now they're sending those back. They already have sent many of them back. And then the most recent one that was enacted this year is Prop 57, which should scare all of you. It was voted for by the state. It passed in Nevada County also. Excuse me. But it has gutted the sentencing laws. So when we get a person convicted, we send them into the judge. The probation does a report on them and comes back and says they should do 12 years. Well, now it used to be you would get up to 8 years, and then you could start applying for parole. And now they're going at their very lowest sentence that they could have possibly gotten, and now they're allowed to go in for, so like at 3 years instead of 8 or 11 years, they're able to apply for parole. And then those people are going to start cycling back into our community. And we've been opposing those. We've had 6 of them thus far. And so far we've been lucky. We've managed with our letter writing campaign with a board of parole hearings to keep those people incarcerated for, at least until the next time. But they can apply every year. So we're fighting that. And that's an ongoing battle that I think it's very important for us to realize and to work against. And to that end, we're going to have an initiative called Safe Streets Initiative coming through in this next election cycle in November that's very important. Over and above my getting elected or re-elected, I think Safe Street is very important for you people to look at closely because it fixes some of those problems. When it changed for a person who is a habitual thief and you can't file a felony on them unless it's over $900, we used to be able to aggregate their crimes if they had past theft crimes and charge them for a felony where we would have more leverage on them. But so the Safe Streets are going to allow us to do that. They're going to take some of these sentencing enhancements and add them back into the penal code. So it's a small fix, but it's a very important one coming up. I saw a hand go up back there.
Well, I had a question. Is that in Nevada County?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we're not going to do the questions
Okay.
after both are spoken.
I just didn't understand if it was a state initiative or is it a county?
It's a statewide initiative. It's led by Anne Marie Schubert, the district attorney in Sacramento, and several DAs have joined on supporting it. Most of the law enforcement throughout the state are going to support it. The merchants organizations are supporting it because they're just getting robbed blind. The criminals know they can get away with it when it's always a misdemeanor, and they don't have much to fear from that. They can do the max you can put them in jail is 480 days, and they can do that standing on their head, and then they're back out doing it again. So we hope to get that changed this year, and that's a really important one coming through. But those are the innovative programs I've done that have decreased the recidivism in Nevada County. Our numbers show that we're a safe community, and I'll cede the floor to Mr. Jennings there. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Glenn Jennings, and I'm running for District Attorney in Nevada County. So let me tell you a little bit about myself with some of the people I haven't seen before here. I've lived here over 20 years. I've been married to my beautiful wife for 36 plus years. And I raised my family here. I've got 3 children and 4 grandkids. I love this place. And I got my bachelor's degree at Chico State, my law degree at Santa Clara. I've been a trial attorney for 30-odd years now and a career prosecutor. I'll fast forward a little bit. I don't want to bore you too much. In 2012, I retired, and I did my little bucket list, and a year later, I got bored. And I put my name out there, and Mr. Maloney from Glenn County, the elected district attorney, asked me to work for him part-time. I said, sure. He just wanted me to do jury trials, so in 2013, I did approximately 18 felony jury trials for Bob. Now, the national average for a prosecutor is about 3 in a year. So as you can imagine, after 18, I was exhausted. And I asked Bob if I could take a break. He said, sure. So in early 2014, my opponent called me at home. I'm sitting there and the phone rang, and he asked me if I wanted to work for him part-time. I said, sure, what do you want me to do? And he said, can you run the Truckee office? And I said, sure, I love it up there. So the next morning, I was being drug tested, I signed some paperwork, and within a few days, I'm in the Truckee office, running the office. Now, a lot of you probably don't know what the Truckee office is. It's a satellite office from the district attorney's office here in Nevada County, in Nevada City. There's one prosecutor up there, and only one. There's one judge, one probation officer, and one public defender. It's a very tight-knit situation up there. And I was the only prosecutor up there from 2014 into 2015. I work closely, I work closely with law enforcement up there, as you can imagine. All their search warrants came to me. When they're out in the field, they would ask questions, hey, we got these 2 cars pulled over, can I do this, can I do that? They contacted me. I went out with the local enforcement up there to track down witnesses, went to crime scenes, got to know them very well. They even came by on Wednesdays because they knew I brought donuts in on those days. When I got up there, I introduced myself to the court and local law enforcement, and I noticed they were kind of angry. Not necessarily at me, but there was an underlying anger. And when I got back to the office for the first time I saw it, there were literally boxes of police reports sitting there that hadn't been looked at for weeks and some of them for months. So I sat down, put my nose to the grindstone, got that office up and running, gained the respect of the court and local law enforcement up there. So much so that the Truckee Police Officers Association endorsed me to be the next district attorney in Nevada County. They know my work product, they know my ethics and honesty and my abilities. So I must have done something right, because I went from part-time to second in command in about a year, plus or minus a month, and brought down to the Nevada City office and asked by my opponent to run the Nevada City office. And I believe there's 8 or 9 prosecutors there at the time. So the office is like this. You have the elected district attorney, you have the assistant district attorney, and then you have the 8, 9, or 10 prosecutors underneath that. And so that's kind of the hierarchy of the office. And I was the assistant district attorney, and I ran that office day-to-day operations. I loved it. I scheduled court appearances, I assigned files, I taught classes on felony sentencing to the young prosecutors there. I taught classes on search warrants. I answered their questions when they were in trial. I also did all the custody filings. Now, custody filing is when a police officer freshly arrests somebody and they bring them to jail and they submit a report. They've got roughly 48 hours to appear in front of a court, and the prosecutor has to make a decision whether to charge them or not. And so I did all the custody filings when I was the assistant district attorney. Now, there was a slight undercurrent of discontent in the Nevada City office, and the prosecutors there were not happy, and I sensed that. And the reason is because, this very reason here, I've got over 100 jury trials under my belt. I've tried numerous murder cases and basically everything else. And that's what I do presently. I'm the serious and violent felony prosecutor in Butte County. And those folks are the worst of the worst. So when I came to Nevada City, I realized that my opponent here won't prosecute a case and hasn't prosecuted a case in 12 years. And that is kind of shocking to me, because where I work, my elected district attorney, Mr. Ramsey, when the big case rolls in, he'll prosecute that case. And there's 30 prosecutors where I work right now, and we all respect him because he talks the talk and he walks the walk. Now, just to give you an example, when I was working in the Truckee office, one of the prosecutors in the Nevada City office called me. Her name was Jenny, and it was a murder case, or the Nix Hollingshead case. I don't know if you guys remember that or not. The gentleman pulled into his driveway and was shot numerous times and beaten to death while his mother stood there on the phone on 911. One of the saddest 911 calls you could ever hear, make you cry, made the grand jury cry. She called me up and said, look, the defense attorneys are continuing this case. How can we stop that? And I said, look, convene a criminal grand jury, right? Don't have a preliminary examination. Convene a criminal grand jury. You get the indictment. You get that filed. You get a trial date. She goes, well, I don't know how to do that. And I said, well, get your boss to do that, right? My opponent. She goes, he doesn't know how to do that. And I said, okay. So what they did is they had to put a prosecutor up in Truckee and move me down here in Nevada City for a week. And I showed her how to convene a criminal grand jury. I helped her with the evidence in that murder case, because I've done this before. And we got the indictment, and she got a trial date. Now, I was supposed to sit with her during the trial because she hadn't done a murder case before, and my opponent hasn't. He doesn't know how. But I left that office because I didn't want to participate in the unethical and corrupt conduct that they were trying to get me involved in. And I'll answer that question if you ask me later on. So what my opponent had to do is hire somebody else to sit with her during the murder trial, because he doesn't have the experience to do that. And you'd think that the elected official, because you're going to hire one of us, you would think that the elected district attorney would be the most experienced person in the office. At least that's what I would hope for. Now, one other example is when I was the assistant district attorney, a case rolled across my desk, and it was a dear lady. Her name was Mary Tassoni, and she was severely and brutally beaten in front of St. Patrick's Church. Now, when that rolled across my desk, I immediately called the investigator and said, meet me out there. So I went out to the church. He showed me right where she was beaten, how high her blood splattered on the front door. I walked the path that that criminal dragged her lifeless or nearly lifeless body to the back of the church, and I looked under the bush where he stuffed her body. I went back to the office, got the police reports, and I filed attempted murder charges on that guy. She made it. She lived. And I assigned that case to me because, excuse me, I wanted to make sure that guy, excuse me, had some broken bones there. I want to make sure that guy got the maximum penalty under the law, okay? I assign it to me. My opponent won't do that, okay? Last year, one of the cases I tried got statewide notoriety. And it was a looting case, and it happened during the mandatory evacuation due to the Oroville Dam crisis. Remember that? All those thousands of people? Well, this fellow decided, hey, that's easy pickings. Everybody's leaving. So he goes in there, trashed a house, a shop, and stole some vehicles. So that case came across my desk. I filed it. I did the preliminary examination. I did the jury trial in that case. There were no fingerprints. There was no DNA. There was no surveillance video. It was all circumstantial evidence. And not only that, but it was based on a aiding and abetting theory. And let me tell you, you better know what you're doing when you try a case like that. So I went down there and I tried that case, and the jury convicted him of everything. Now my opponent wouldn't have a clue how to try that case, okay? So what I'm trying to tell you is that he's the elected DA. He talks the talk, but he doesn't walk the walk. He expects everybody else to go down there and prosecute cases and go to trial, but he won't do that. Now, I've taught a long time ago that you lead by example, and that's something I will do if I'm elected. I will prosecute cases there, and I will earn the respect of the prosecutors. I took some classes from UC Davis in management. And I think the main point that I got out of those classes was, number one, people leave their jobs because they don't respect their boss. And the number one reason why they stay in their jobs is because they respect their boss. Now, I'm going to hold my hand up here because in 2015, my opponent here demoted his assistant DA, demoted her, and promoted me into her spot. Now, I left because I wouldn't participate in the unethical and corrupt conduct I observed. So I left, and then he had an interim assistant district attorney, and she lasted, I think, 3 months or 6 months along those lines before she left to a different county. And then he hired yet another gentleman by the name of Joe. Now, I never met Joe, but all I heard was good things about him. He was experienced, he had done murder cases, he knew what he was doing in court. He lasted a year, somewhere around that time. He left for another county. Then he had to hire yet another gentleman who I don't really know. He hired him in 2017, who's there right now. That's 5 assistant DAs in 3 years. That's turmoil, to put it politely. It's chaos, to tell you realistically what's going on. Those are the people that run that office day to day. And since I left in 2015, I know maybe 1 or 2 of the line prosecutors that are still there. So there's been a huge turnover rate down there also. So what will I bring? I'll bring my experience. I'll lead by example. Not only will I talk the talk, I'll walk the walk. I'll earn the respect of the prosecutors there, who will stay. They will stay there, and they will learn, because number 2, I can mentor them. I can teach them about felony sentence. I can teach them about search warrants. I can train them how to do jury trials, something my opponent can't do. And I can do that first day I step in there. So not only will I stabilize the office with my experience in earning their respect, but I can train them immediately. And the third thing is this. I will put into place proper filing techniques. Now you're wondering, what's a filing technique? Okay? When the police bring a police report over to the DA's office, they're saying, look, we investigated this case and we'd like you to file these charges. Okay, so the DA looks at that and the DA makes a decision what charges to file. And some offices will file something just right off the front and then plea bargain it down to something at the other end. And I get a lot of complaints about folks about this office doing that. What my implementation will do is do proper techniques. I can teach the young folks there how to do it so that when we file a felony, we mean a felony. We're not going to plea bargain it down. So I'll stabilize the office. I can mentor the folks with my experience and implement the proper filing techniques there. And lastly, I've heard this from numerous people now. My opponent says he's going to retire in a couple of years. And he's going to try to get his assistant district attorney appointed to his vacated spot. So that's up to you. You decide who you want to vote in here, given that information. I promise I'll work the whole 4 years and earn every paycheck. So if you want somebody with experience, and I'll probably be the most experienced person in that office if you elect me, I'll stabilize it. I teach the folks, they'll hang around, they'll stick around, get experience, and become more effective instead of this revolving door. I'll implement proper filing techniques, so no more of this plea bargaining stuff. And I'll be there the whole 4 years for you. Okay? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, now it's your turn to ask questions, but it's going to be one at a time. You're going to have to speak loudly. Whoever you are asking needs to repeat the question and then go ahead and answer. You had your hand up already. You want to start? Stand up, please,
Okay.
also.
Hi, Mr. Newell.
Hi.
I'm Tammy. I don't know if you know
Tammy.
who I am. I am the founder of Citizens for Safe Parks in Nevada County Crime Watch. We work with the police on a regular basis. We clean up the parks. We see a lot going on, a lot. And we've tried to contact you 2 times on 2 separate occasions. And you said in your speech that you kept in constant communication with community members and such and so forth. You've never even returned our call. And this is multiple people from the group that have called you. And, with that being said, I'm 4th generation Nevada County. I know that Prop 47 hurt counties all over California really bad. But every single time we talk to the sheriff, every single time we talk to Grass Valley Police Department, which are at every single one of our meetings, and thank you for coming to one, they always say, we can't do that because the district attorney would basically get mad at us. We can't charge this person because he'll get mad. That's what the sheriff's department is saying. That's what Grass Valley Police Department is saying. And our streets are literally like the zombie apocalypse. There is people literally just completely doing whatever they want. And it just seems to come back to you, and I'm just wondering why you haven't been in contact with us. I haven't seen you. I've seen the county supervisors. Everybody's been working at the parks. You're the only one that I have not seen, and I'm wondering why.
Okay. Tammy, a couple issues there you bring up. And it's not consistent with what we're doing right now. Nevada City and Grass Valley, both are the ones with the biggest and most obvious homeless problems and the camping problems, have worked with my deputies very closely in identifying the Nevada City. We have about 30 people who use the vast majority of the police resources, probably 60% of it. It's not real, it's that ongoing. They're picking them up all the time. They're taking them in. They're getting kicked loose because they're city ordinance violations that they're filing with the courts, and then they don't show up to that, and they get warrants put out for them. Grass Valley just we just refreshed that list of people, and there's about 45 people on that list. And my deputies, when we charge cases, we do that analysis. Is this a person that is in there a lot, or is this a person that's in there the first time? If they're a first-time offender or maybe a second-time offender, we have diversion programs we can put them on and just get them back out of the system. But the ones that are multiple offenders, what our strategy is for those people is to offer them very high jail sentences or some sort of treatment. And most of them will take the jail sentence at first because they don't want to have treatment. Oftentimes, halfway through the sentence, they'll say, well, I'm more interested now in a program. And we've had great success with that with some people that have been longtime alcoholics who are constantly dragging them out of the gutter and out of shop stores. So we recognize those issues. We deal with them. I spoke with somebody in your organization. You've contacted me twice. One was with the Simply Country case, and I forget what the other was about. But I sent an email in one case. Well, nobody invited me to a meeting, but I'd be happy to.
I mean, we've tried.
So, I'm sorry about that, and I would be happy to attend meetings. I do, a lot of community meetings, but I can't do them all the time.
Well, I
so.
mean, we're directly it's related to crime. I
Yeah.
mean, you would think that you would want to be a part of that and hear our concerns.
I would
be on
certainly
the-
love your
Be
input.
on the Facebook page,
I'm
anything.
afraid a lot
Yeah.
of people are not
Yeah.
hearing this
Mr.
conversation.
Newell,
so-
Yes.
talk to the back of the room.
I will. I'm sorry. I was getting a little casual there. I'll speak up and stand up next time.
Okay. Any other questions? Back there? Yes.
Mr. Newell and Mr. Jennings, I've learned a lot already just listening to the two of you about how a DA's office works, and I would guess that most of us in this audience really are not that familiar with the whole investigation, how charges are filed, and so forth. We count on our elected officials to do that work for us so that we can pursue our lives and our businesses. One thing that I think for me as a citizen is that we're looking for competence and skill in the area of prosecuting crime. We want our streets to be safe. At the same time, we want justice. We want what is just. And for me, reading the newspaper and having informal conversations, the Nick Chittick case was particularly confusing to us, and or at least to me. And at one point, felony charges are leveled against a local business, a local owner who had no criminal record at all, in my understanding. And now felony charges, multiple, are leveled. And then suddenly the case is resolved with a misdemeanor. And can you help us know how that process works? Because I think that really goes to the heart of what we're looking for. We want balance, we want wisdom. So if both of you could respond to how a case like that is handled.
Well, I'll start. Specifically, he's asked about the Simply Country case where it came in as a felony animal abuse case by the animal control officer. One of my deputies charged it as a felony. And because, believe me, the photographs and the pictures to a person who's not familiar with animals and farms and feed stores and whatnot were really egregious. And so as we go into the case, it's initially filed as a felony. And we wobbled back and forth. Should we do it as a felony? Should we do it as a misdemeanor? But the evidence at that point appeared so egregious that we opted to do it as a felony because we can always back down to a misdemeanor. We can't always go up to a felony. So as we go on, we realized with the evidence that there was some mitigating factors. It didn't appear that he was actually consciously doing it. It was more of a neglect action. His own expert that he hired came in and said that he wasn't up to modern standards, is my understanding, for keeping fowl. And so he says, okay, what we want out of this case is not a felony conviction or even a conviction for that matter. We want him, because you're right, he's a citizen, and we recognize that, and a good citizen. And the community was up in arms over it, and I understand that. And I read every single email. I still have them all saved in a file on my computer. But what we do is when we says, okay, you get that cured, you plead to this really innocuous misdemeanor, which was failing to care for your fowl that you were feeding and supposed to sell, and at the end of your probation period, you withdraw your plea and be clear. So I thought that was a good resolution. A small fine. He followed through with what we needed to see, what the animal control people wanted to see, and what many of the customers, so as many people that called me in support of the Chittick family and the store, there was an equal number of people that were calling me, telling me to run them out of town. I have to find the balance in the middle there, and I think I did with that particular case.
May I ask a
Yes.
Can I
Yeah, but
Can I respond to that question first? Okay, that whole decision with the Chittock family comes down, again, to experience, all right? We're in a rural community. Animals die, especially chickens. I've got chickens. And all of a sudden, boom, a bunch of them will pass away. And so especially, I mean, think about this. Here's a feed store that's in the business of selling these animals. It's in their interest to keep them healthy. And so one of the things you can do is that instead of filing a felony hoping for a misdemeanor conviction, we can PFI it, which is pending further investigation. And that is put it off to the side and have other people look at the case, get all the evidence before you make a decision. You know, this is a lack of experience, ladies and gentlemen. We file a felony. Well, we got pressure. No, you know, that's not the job of the district attorney's office. We don't act on pressure. I've been pressured many times to commit acts, to file felonies, and I refused to do so, and it turned out I was right in the long run. But you have to have the backbone to stand up to this pressure. I've got the experience, and I would stand up to that pressure. I wouldn't bow to it, file a felony, hoping for a misdemeanor. I mean, that's, you know, if I did that where I work right now, I'd be called into the corner office and probably demoted, right? So what we need to do is get experience in there to look at these cases properly, whether to file or not. Thank you.
Wanted to ask a question. Which one was it?
right there in the gray and black sweater.
It's my sister.
Yes. Oh, then you get to talk for her.
Just for clarification, since we haven't met, I'm Kurt Chittock.
It's nice to meet you, Kurt.
Nice to meet you too. I'm actually the owner of that store. So I have to say that, and I don't say this because you may not be aware, but there are many things that you are not enlightened, and there are things that are known. I mean, I can tell you because I've read the police report probably 1,700 times. And the officers addressed my son Nick as the owner and manager of the store, which is inaccurate. I've always been the owner, been the owner for 31 years. No one ever asked me anything about that situation. I know that there are comments that have been made by both the Sheriff's Department and even yourself. You made the comment that the necropsies are not yet in from Davis to determine whether the illness was a factor, meaning the illness as to whether there were dead birds or not, but the next statement was, but I'm going to proceed with this case anyway. With all due respect, I think there were a significant amount of errors that were done, primarily, and I will spare you a little bit, I think primarily done within the Sheriff's Department. If I have a concern, no one really checked even the simple fact to know who the real owner of the store was, which was me. I happen to know because I paid an attorney to contact your office because I felt after the Sheriff's Department had seized 36 or 360 birds, their count, not ours, out of 900 birds on the property. In other words, not every bird on the property. These birds were isolated in a specific pen according to CDFA guidelines. Your comment about the vet that we hired, you probably should call him and talk to him because what you are understanding is inaccurate. If you talk to Dr. Bland, you'll find that he found everything to be perfectly in order along with 4 vets at Davis. But none of that was given to you, so I'm going to give you a cited.
I'm telling you what his attorney told me, so that's all I can do. And I presume his attorney's
Point is,
a fair
bottom line
representation.
is that within the investigation, it's really difficult because
I
there are
think we
things
need
there
to
that-
stop with this.
I understand that, but I'm just going to
Because
say,
I'm sure there are other questions out here
Yeah,
too.
but-
We could spend a whole night on it.
10 seconds and then.
Take it
and just say,
offline.
Yeah, I will.
Well,
Afterwards,
just-
I'll talk to you.
Just call me and we'll sit down and have a cup of coffee. I'm happy to haggle it out if you want after the fact. You know, we're armchair quarterback, so.
Okay, this is for Glenn Jennings. I'd be interested in his comments on that one. And also, he said something about if we want to hear more of what he was talking about, ask. So I'm asking.
Okay, so 2 questions. The first one is concerning the Chittock, the felony filing, and I think I addressed that. Stand up to the pressure from law enforcement. where the district attorney's office is a separate entity. We are independent of the law enforcement. We're a creature of the law, and we make independent decisions. We don't bow to pressure, okay? And that's the feeling I got in the Chittock case, at least from what I read in the paper and the people I talked to. He bowed to pressure, getting a lot of pressure from animal rights people, and he filed those felony charges hoping to get a misdemeanor. That is not the purpose of the district attorney. We're to seek justice. Now, as to the other question, it's going to take me a few minutes to run through this, so is that okay?
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Okay. So, why did I leave the office?
Whatever it was you were going to.
You said there was a lot of, you didn't want to be involved in the illegal or...
Okay, so here's what happened. So I went from part-time to second in command and brought down to the Nevada City office, and I ran that office. And I told you what I did there. I did the day-to-day operations, the custody filings, the mentoring, et cetera. One of the things I did is I went to the narcotics task force meetings every week. They had weekly meetings. I wanted to know what the drugs were coming into the county, where they're coming from, who's bringing them in, what amounts. I wanted to have some idea. Because up in Truckee, we did a lot of interdiction on Interstate 80 up there. Massive amounts of marijuana, massive amounts of, I had my largest methamphetamine case ever. It's 9 pounds of methamphetamine in a car going through there. So anyways, one thing I noticed with the narcotics task force is that they were using the outdated search warrant. So I introduced a new form to them. I also gained their respect as they wanted me to respond and be present in court when one of their search warrants were challenged. Now I have to stop for a second and explain what a search warrant is, okay? A search warrant is a document that is prepared by generally a police officer, and it's in the form of a little story called a declaration or an affidavit. And basically, it says, there's a crime being committed over here, and this is how I know about it. And so I'm going to give you a typical case so you'll understand. The police arrest somebody that has heroin in their pocket. And they say, look, don't arrest me, I'll tell you where I bought it from. And the cop goes, okay, where'd you buy it? And he goes, well, I bought it from 123 Main Street in Grass Valley. And I'll buy another sample for you if you want. So the police go, oh, okay, you know, here's 20 bucks, and they watch. He goes in, they buy some more heroin, comes back out. Look, here's the heroin I bought. And they write all that down in a declaration. Okay? You understand that? And they just have to show by probable cause that a felony is being committed in that particular house. And I'm going to use 123 Main Street as the address. So what the officer does is write out that declaration. So-and-so bought some heroin there. I observed it. I gave him 20 bucks. I saw him come back out with heroin. We need to go to that house and search it for heroin because I believe they're selling heroin out of that house. They type that up. They bring that search warrant over to the district attorney's office, who reviews those warrants and makes sure that there's probable cause in that affidavit. And then the district attorney signs it. Okay? After the district attorney, and we do that as a courtesy for the court. After the district attorney signs the affidavit, the officer then takes that affidavit and the search warrant over to a judge, and the judge looks at it and reads it, makes sure that there's probable cause in there, that the crime's being committed, they're selling heroin out of 123 Main Street. And then he swears the officer in. You swear everything's true on this? Yes, I do. The officer signs the affidavit, then the judge signs the search warrant. And the search warrant is an order. It's an order from the court telling any police officer in Nevada County to go to 123 Main Street, enter that house, however you want, you can kick the door in, and search for heroin. Right? So in this particular case, that's what happened. It was, I think, methamphetamine. They went in, got some evidence, came out, wrote up a report, brought it to the district attorney's office, somebody filed charges and began prosecuting that individual. That individual got an attorney. That attorney filed a motion challenging the truthfulness of that search warrant. Okay? Now here's where I enter. That officer called me up and said, hey, can you come down here and defend me in court? I go, sure, I'll meet you in front of the courtroom doors and kind of give you a heads up what kind of questions you can expect from the court and the defense attorney. So I met that gentleman there. I'd seen him before, but I never really talked to him. And I said, okay, I met him there, and I said, these are the kind of questions you can expect. And he stopped me and he said, hey, I can't take the stand. Okay, now I've been a trial attorney for 30 years, and I've come across hundreds, if not thousands, of law enforcement officers I've dealt with. And never have I had a law enforcement officer tell me I can't take the stand concerning one of their search warrants. Because that tells you volumes, right? No, I can't raise my right hand, swear to tell the truth, that everything in there is true. So my next question to him was, why not? Why can't you take the stand, in essence? And he opens it up and he points to the address of the house that they searched and said, I didn't have this information at the time I wrote the warrant. Wow. Now I know for sure what's going on here, right? And I said, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, dismiss the case. And I said, I can do that. So I went in there and I dismissed that case. I went back to the office, I told my opponent, and I also told the chief investigator. Now, every DA's office has their own little police force, and they're called DA investigators, and there's 3 or 4 or 5 or how many they have. And where I work, we've got 27 of them, so we have like our own little police force. And the head of that little police force is called the chief investigator, chief district attorney investigator. So I told my opponent what happened, and I told the chief investigator what happened. And they all agreed, we need to investigate this. And I said, yeah. So we brought in 3 law enforcement officers who worked with this individual. One of them had been his supervisor at one time. And brought him in and interviewed these 3 law enforcement personnel. And I said, can I sit in on the interviews? Because this is important to me. Search warrants, I kind of have an interest. And he said, yeah. So I sat in each interview from each law enforcement officer, and I heard troubling stories that they told the chief investigator. They pushed photographs and documents across the table to the chief investigator. And I asked one question at the end of each interview to each one of those law enforcement officers. I said, if you were me, and this guy came in with a search warrant, would you approve it? And every one of those officers said no. Don't approve, basically don't approve any of his search warrants. Now that's huge, right? So we decided to continue the investigation and extend it and talk to some of the other law enforcement that were involved in some of these stories to make sure if it's true or they're just stories, we don't know, but we want to find out. And one of the other things was to get all the search warrants from the court that this individual had written to verify and talk to their confidential informants, see if that's what they told them was in the warrants. So we're continuing this investigation, and at some point my opponent here came in and told me, this investigation's over. And I said, why? And he gave me no reason. He said, it's over. Now, he's my boss at the time, and I said, okay. I mean, what else can I do, right? So a little time later, my opponent came into my office, and he put a piece of paper down on my desk, and it was on district attorney letterhead. And it said, he goes, sign this. And I picked it up, and it said, after a complete and thorough investigation, this office finds no wrongdoing on behalf of this officer. And I looked up, I said, this isn't true. I'm not going to sign this. So my opponent took that paper away and left. A short while later, he came in and told me, as well as other deputies there, who will verify this story, that that narcotics officer was now on what was called rehabilitation. Now, in 30 years as a trial attorney and a career prosecutor, I've never heard that term for this type of situation. And I said, what does this mean? And he said, this narcotics officer is now going to write every search warrant for the task force. I mean, common sense tells you that's crazy, right? And give the person making that decision a law degree and being a prosecutor, that's incompetence, right? He's going to jeopardize every search warrant now? He said, but there's going to be other law enforcement personnel that'll come in and verify every portion of the affidavit. Remember that little story they have to write up? So not only is this officer going to write this declaration, but he's going to come in with other officers who can verify every part of it. And I said, you know, if another police officer can come in and verify every part of that warrant. It's a little strange, but I'll go along with that. Because when an officer comes in with a search warrant, I've looked at hundreds of them, if not thousands, I trust what they say and I believe what they say. You have to. So in this particular case, a couple weeks went by and I was at a crime scene or somewhere, and one of the senior prosecutors there called me up and said, this person under investigation's in my office, and he's got 2 law enforcement cops that can vouch as to Part A and B of the warrant, but not Part C. Should I sign it? I said, no, that's not part of the deal. So he didn't sign it. A little while after that, I'm back in my office, and this narcotics officer comes into my office with a search warrant and says, can you review my search warrant? And I said, where's the other law enforcement officers that are going to vouch for it? And he acted like I didn't know what I was talking about. So I got up, I closed the door, I said, hey, you know you're under a rehabilitation. You're supposed to have other cops in here to look at this affidavit or vouch for it. And again, this blank stare like, what are you talking about? So I knew the fix was in. Got up, opened the door, I said, hey man, I can't sign this warrant. So he left. And it wasn't long after that, I get called into my opponent's office. Now as the assistant district attorney, you're at will, okay? No protection whatsoever for employment. You're at will. And my opponent, I sat down, he closed the door, and he said, you pissed off the sheriff by not signing this guy's warrants. I'm either going to terminate you or you can resign. I said, I'll resign. I don't want to create a scene. So I left. And I called up my former boss, who's Mr. Ramsey. Let me tell you something about Mr. Ramsey. He's the elected DA in Butte County. He's the longest running district attorney in California history. Probably the most respected, and without a doubt, one of the most experienced. He's tough as nails and runs a tight ship. And I called him up after I left here and said, hey, can you use an experienced trial attorney? And the first thing out of his mouth was, what happened? Well, I told him exactly what I told you. And he goes, well, you know, I got to call Cliff. I said, go ahead. So he called Cliff, and then he called me right back, and he said, when can you start? And I've been there ever since, the last 2.5 years or so. Now here's the dangerous part. During that 2.5 years, I've been subpoenaed numerous times to come back to Nevada County and testify in court. I've been subpoenaed by the defense to testify against this officer and his warrants in cases that are ongoing. And during those times, I sat outside the courtroom, never testified once, numerous times. Those cases were either dismissed or reduced to misdemeanors, every one of them. Until I gave notice that I'm running for DA and explained this situation in my press release. Then all of a sudden I get to testify. But I'll tell you something, again, that's inexperience on behalf of my opponent in coming up with these cockamamie ideas and endangering you by having to dismiss cases, you know, instead of having me testify. Again, it boils down to experience. That will never happen if you elect me. I hope that explains it.
Any more questions?
Well, if I could address a couple points of his.
I think only in fairness that Mr.
Right.
Newell have some minutes to respond.
So let's put this in context, because so much of what Mr. Jennings says is true. Generally speaking, a couple things didn't happen, and a couple things did happen. First of all, the search warrant was written a year before this hearing. Mr. Jennings was tasked with going, my opponent was tasked with going to court and doing what's called a Frank's motion, or a motion to traverse. And it was at that point when the officer came up and said, there's some discrepancies between my 2 parts of my warrant. I'm concerned about them. Let's talk. That is what went wrong right there. The officer made a mistake. We knew about it. As prosecutors, it's our duty to take these officers who write warrants and do the stuff and guide them through the system. It was in that motion, it was at that point 2 years ago that should have come to rest. because they would have gone back into the courtroom to the judge's chambers, they would have looked at the sealed search warrant, they would have looked at the other search warrant, and would realize that there was nothing wrong. Now, that's all coming out in litigation right now. By next Friday, the cases will be over, and we'll have a ruling from the court. We'll actually have now 3 rulings from the courts, and I presume they're going to go in favor of Mr. Mackey's. Now, I've based my entire career on doing the right thing every day for the right reason. And it would have been easy for me to say, okay, this cop made a mistake on a search warrant. Let's just shove him to the side. I won't take any more reports from him and tank his career. A young man, wife, new kid, not a dishonest bond in his body. He made a mistake. Who has not made a mistake in here? I've made mistakes. But for political expediency, I could have kicked him to the side, and we would have never had to go and address any of this. As far as dismissing cases and reducing them to misdemeanors, if anybody's paying attention in the last couple of years, Prop 64 cut the guts out of all my felony prosecutions in marijuana. Of course they're misdemeanors. They're misdemeanors by law. And before the law changed, some of them we reduced early because, you know, it was going to go into effect in January. What difference, why do we get a conviction on a felony and then have them file a paper 2 months later and then reduce it to a misdemeanor? So that's a little bit inaccurate. And it wasn't because of this search warrant that my opponent was let loose from the office. It was a culmination of events. The search warrant was just one, jumping to conclusions too early, not finding out all the facts before we dismissed the case. 2 was he refused to participate actively in an ongoing homicide investigation. And I don't care if the sheriff gets mad. He gets mad at me all the time. We have a good working relationship. There's tension occasionally between our offices, but we go back and forth. But what we do is we respect each other. We work well together. When we have issues, we pick up the phone and talk to each other and work them out. And that's how Nevada County works. And that's how it's always worked in my tenure. So, yeah, some of the things are true. Kid made a mistake. He's written hundreds of search warrants since then, and not a problem with him. So I stand behind the actions I took, and I think that the young officer is going to be vindicated when the court hearing is over on this Friday and we have some decisions from the judge.
Joey?
So my question is this. Did you ask Mr. Jennings to sign a piece of paper that said it was over, and did you just say it's not really over until next week?
No. There's 2 things going on. And I took a paper into Mr. Jennings' office. It was my signature line at the bottom of the paper. I was quoting him as to what something he said outside the courtroom, and I wanted to make sure the quote was fine. I asked him to verify that what I attributed to him was correct. I signed that document. It's a memo. It's public now, where I pulled this sealed search warrant, or the copy of the sealed search warrant, presumably from the Narcotics Task Force computer, matched it to the search warrant, and went through the sequences of events. So what actually happened there was, yes, he said, my snitch told me that the person was at 123 Main Street. In reality, and he wrote this in the main part of the search warrant, in the public part, he says, my snitch told me the guy drives a black 1986 Mustang. He's parked in front of a red house with white trim. I later drove by, ran the license plate off the car, came back to that house, 123 Main Street, came back to that suspect. I showed my snitch a photograph off a DMV and confirmed that it was him. And then, so that's what happened in the search warrant aspect of it. So yes, that part was done. And as far as canceling the investigation, if you know anything about law enforcement,
I know I do.
okay, so we started an investigation. We found enough information from the 3 people he's talking about that demanded that there be an IA investigation. A DA doesn't do an IA investigation, but there's a couple practical reasons. I cannot force them to testify in a hearing or in an investigation. In a personnel investigation in a law enforcement agency, your boss can tell you to testify, and you have to talk. You have to give an interview. My investigators are criminal investigators, but they can't force them. They have to give them a Miranda reading and say anything you say can and will be, and so on. So that's why, for a practical reason, I stopped the investigation once we developed enough factual basis to give the sheriff a running start at it, and then they you've read about that in the paper. They did their investigation, and a huge document, and tens of people they interviewed. They did a very thorough job, so that's what happened with that.
May I respond to that? So what he's saying is that he didn't come into my office and put a document on my table that said, after a complete and thorough investigation, we find no wrongdoing on behalf of this narcotics officer. So one of us is telling the truth, and one of us isn't, okay? Because that happened.
As regards that search warrant, just that search warrant, not his overall interactions with the agency.
So I guess he's now saying it did happen. He did put that document saying after a complete and thorough investigation that I wouldn't sign. Second part is this. The sheriffs can do an internal investigation, and they have their criteria that they use. But there's also a duty under the law for the district attorney's office to conduct their own investigation, and it concerns this thing called Brady evidence. And that's not something the sheriff is looking at. They're looking at something different. The DA's office is looking at Brady evidence, and we have our own duty to investigate that. And that's what I was trying to continue and to complete by getting the search warrants and continuing the investigation. And the last point is that narcotics officer never told me he made a mistake. I've had police officers tell me they make mistakes on search warrants, and we can deal with that. But what he's telling you here, if you listen carefully, is he said, this officer has written hundreds of search warrants, and then in the next breath he says, he's a new guy, he made a mistake. Oh, come on. You write hundreds of search warrants, and now you're a new guy making little mistakes? No. You know at that point, if you make a mistake in a warrant, that you tell the DA, hey, I made a mistake, and here it is. I mean, it's that simple. It's not difficult. And that happens infrequently, but it does happen. We can deal with that. But he never said that. He said, dismiss the case. I can't take the stand.
Yes.
Were there any other officers
Oh, come on.
We got to move to the next.
involved in this investigation? And were there any other officers that were exonerated?
There were he's asking if there were any other officers in this investigation and were any of them exonerated. In this specific investigation, there was not. There were several officers that were interviewed as to statements that were attributed to them, and at the end of the process, the sheriff found through the IA investigation that the kid hadn't done anything wrong. There was one officer that made a lot of the allegations up front, and he was ultimately discredited, and when we started looking at him, not for dishonesty, but for potential criminal liability, he resigned from him. So yeah, that was the officer that was making most of the allegations against the deputy.
If I just may, real briefly. We did interview 3 officers who had worked very closely with this person, and one of them had been his prior supervisor. They all said they wouldn't approve, or I shouldn't approve any of his search warrants. So that information is critical. The other critical part here is, again, I told you that the district attorney's office has a separate and independent duty to investigate this type of behavior, separate from the sheriff. And that was canceled and stopped short by my opponent. All right?
So I have a question.
Yes, sir.
It's going to be why for you, and then what would you do? So about a year and a half ago, somebody came into my backyard and stole my dog. Now, my dog, Boxer, dying of kidney failure. Been to the vet every week, getting shots, blood work done, everything else. My back gate weighs about 200 pounds. It takes a grown man or a grown adult to open that gate. When we realized she was gone, it was just after dark. Called Nevada County Sheriff's Department, called dispatch. The first story I got when a female officer returned my phone call was an older gentleman from out of town found the dog. Then, after further persistence in Facebook and everything else, I found out the dog was at Sammy's friends. Not only at Sammy's friends, but at somebody's house. Keep in mind, my dog is dying from kidney failure. Protein is poison. So then we called back the next morning, I talked to Nevada County Animal Control, who is Sheriff's Department, and they tell me that a lady opened my gate and took my dog. That's theft. Why is it that when I continue to press, and it took me going to Sammy's friends and kicking the damn door until I could get a goddamn sheriff to show up and assist me. Somebody stole my dog. Then the next officer told me that they would not put the case in front of you, Mr. Newell, because you would not press charges. They stole my dog. The Sheriff's Department knows exactly who took my dog. Nobody will tell me who took my dog, and nobody will press charges. 2 weeks later, I had my dog cremated because somebody thought they were doing the right thing. The right thing would have been to knock on my door. The right thing would have been to call Nevada County Animal Control and have them do a welfare check on the dog. The right thing would have been for you to press charges against somebody that stole my goddamn dog out of my backyard. That would have been the right thing to do. But you consistently fall short in all of these little things that affect us people that pay taxes every single day. It's to the point somebody broke the window in my truck, in my front yard, took things out of my car. I talked to Alex Gamelgard about it. It's amazing that the people within the district attorney's office can't calculate what it costs to fix the window, what the labor costs, the stereo that was stolen, the labor to put it in, the harness, the adapter, the everything. Oh, well, it's not $900. At the end of the day, when you add all of that up, it exceeds $900 by double. But nobody presses charges on that because the individual item that was taken wasn't worth $900. But I tell you what, if I see him stealing my stereo and I break both their legs, you're going to put me in jail. That's that work. That's what I want to know. And from you, I want to know how that's going to change.
Do you want to go first?
You know, I'm sorry about your dog. That's I get that, and I appreciate
There's
that.
a member of Sammy's friends that took it.
My neighbor.
So,
Talk to them in the room.
I don't have a police report to go on. They don't refer it to me, and we don't reject every case. We prosecute 3,500 cases a year, and we have good conviction. We have good results. I have good attorneys working for us. They're a good, strong crew right now. Have been. And it hasn't been a steady flow of people out. We've had one person in the last 2 years retire, and we filled that immediately. But other than that, we've had a long run of stability in the office. But you've got a complaint like that, rather than waiting to see me months or weeks later, call me ahead of time. People do it all the time.
We've put in phone calls too. We've never gotten a phone call.
You have not. If you have left a message on my machine, you have been called back within 48 hours.
Wood has left you a
I
message,
do it.
and there's been no return phone call. Ehud Gat has left you a message. There's been no return phone call. If you have, and the reason I say this, I realize it's not directly you, it's the Sheriff's Department. But if you have such a close working relationship with the Sheriff's Department,
So I said,
why was it not brought to your attention? I wanted to file a report. Somebody stole my dog. I wasn't even allowed to file a report. But they won't even take a report.
But because they said he's going to prosecute. That's why
Well,
they
that's
said
a-
we
that's a-
are not going to file this
that's a-
because he will not prosecute this.
well, I'm prosecuting something because, like I said, I've got
System's broken.
3,500 cases that do go through the system. So
Everyone needs
I
to
am
go
sorry
through
about
the
your dog.
Everyone, not just the ones that are cherry picked. Everyone needs to go through. Every member of this community needs to be important. Their problems need to be important. It doesn't just need to be the sheriff's decide or you decide or GP. It's not your guys' decision. It's what's important. It's our decision because it's our tax dollars that pays your salary. Every single person's important.
Okay.
Yes.
My turn? No. So I think it comes down to, again, it comes down to experience, which creates a reputation with the police force. You called me up and wanted to meet with me, and I met you that one night when the electricity was out. It was a dark building. It was kind of eerie. Everybody had flashlights. And there's like 12 or 15 people with lights on me asking me questions. And I'm in a foreign place. It was kind of interesting, but I'm glad I made it there that night. But if you have the reputation with the police force, and what the cops are telling you, I'm assuming is true, shows what their belief is with the district attorney's office in its present condition. I will change that. They will know that I'm a no-nonsense prosecutor and I know what I'm doing. And if that comes to my attention, and I will immediately go to that police department and immediately fix that problem. So there will be a whole different reputation if you elect me between the district attorney's office and law enforcement agencies. I promise you that.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question because every time we talk to Keith Royal or a district attorney or anybody from the county, they tell us that crime is going down. But yet we pick up the Union on a daily basis and we see murders, we see drug busts, and I'm not talking about a little bit of carrying marijuana, I'm talking about big plastic boxes and stuff like that. Is that not yours to prosecute? And then secondly, I would say I was privileged to go through the Nevada County training that they have, and we were introduced to all the departments. And when we had our talk from you, Mr. Newell, you had stated that when you took over as district attorney, the person that you took over from was not only over budget in his department by $750,000, I believe that's the amount that you stated, but was also so far behind in the caseload, like 300 and some odd number of cases behind that they had not prosecuted. And you said within the first year, you were able to clear those cases off your books and you came in under budget. I'd like to hear from you how that happened.
So you're asking how I came under budget?
And how you handled all those cases, and how did you plead them out? Did you prosecute them?
Well, we're talking 2006, but I can tell you generally what I did when I took over the office. I mandated that everybody work full days. There was a certain belief that you didn't have to work the whole day because you were a professional employee, and there's some idiosyncrasies about the county policy that says you can get 4 hours off a day, but some people were just presuming they only had to work 4 hours. So we stopped that. So I had everybody at their desk all day long. I got down and sharpened my pencils. When it came time to do the budget, I sat down and diligently worked to get things back in line. Now, Mike wasn't doing a bad job. Mike's a good friend of mine and has endorsed me throughout and still endorses me. But, you know, the ship had kind of, you know, got a little bit off path. And so through a period of developing the office, developing the professionals that I have in the office, we were able to get up to full speed. We put in modern business systems. We've got a case management system that greatly assists my attorneys in charging and makes it easier for them to handle the volume of cases that they handle. We develop diversion programs, so some of the cases don't even come through the attorneys and into the court for the right people. So they go out of the system, and we don't make criminals out of them because almost all of those don't come back to us. Those are the various things I did to bring those back in line. And then I hired recently my assistant. My admin assistant is a brilliant woman with numbers and books, and she helps keep the ship afloat. So that's what a leader does. A leader doesn't jump in. If you're a football coach, you don't jump into the game and become quarterback because you think you're better than everybody else. A leader has vision and develops a vision for the office. And my vision was going forward, being on budget, prosecuting our cases appropriately and fairly, and doing it with smart people, developing a succession plan. So we have a bunch of youngsters coming up in the office that in 4 years from now can step up and be elected. I probably have 2 or 3 in the office that are capable of doing that. And I encourage that, or you know, somebody from the outside will run. But that's how I dealt with those issues. They're a long time ago, so the details I can't refer to right at this point. But the proof's in the pudding. We've got a great office. We're efficient. We're effective. I have good law enforcement agent. I have good relationships with each and every chief executive in the county. So I hope that answers the question without being too. Sue's been back there looking for some recognition.
I just had the things that came up, and including your last statement, Mr. Newell.
Speak up, speak up.
Previous DAs, including, as you know, your predecessor, Michael Ferguson, and you may not know, previous Nevada County DAs, John Darlington, Ron McMillan, and Harold Berliner, all personally prosecuted serious and violent felonies, including murder cases. Why have you not done so as DA?
Fair question, Sue. For the exact reason I described. I'm not the best prosecutor in the world, but I'm a damn good administrator, and I know what the office needs, and I've hired the right people to do that work. And my job, look, I'm the CEO of the biggest law firm in Nevada County. I've got 30 plus people working for me. I've got 7 law enforcement officers. I've got 9 attorneys besides myself. I've got a host of administrative staff, and I've got victim witness advocates. Anybody that runs a business knows that brings its own, it kind of creates its own life within, you've got HR problems, you've got to, I'm working at the state level on various things that affect our community and criminal justice specifically. So no, I don't prosecute the crimes. It would take up a huge section of bandwidth of my time when I'm supposed to be running a budget, working with other agencies to set up programs in the community to attack and to offset, counteract what's going on in Sacramento. They keep shoving this stuff down our throats in the criminal justice system, and we have to fight back at a local level. And if I'm taking all the important cases to trial, that takes up the majority of her time. It's a big office. It's not an 8 to 5 job, and I put in the time to do it and have proven to be effective at it. So, again, thank you.
May I respond?
Oh, okay.
If I may, where I work, Mr. Ramsey has an office of 30 prosecutors. They're all trial attorneys. He's got a much larger staff than Nevada City here, probably 4 or 5 times the size. When a big case rolls into that office, Mr. Ramsey prosecutes it. He takes it to jury trial. And I would think that if you hire a district attorney, you would expect that person to handle those big high-profile cases. That's what you hire us for. We run the office, but we also know how to prosecute cases. Do you want somebody who doesn't know how to prosecute a case as your district attorney? I think not. And I'll just leave it there.
Sorry, but I'm going to take it down a notch. You can answer this or not answer it. It's a personal choice, but I was curious of who each of you are backing for sheriff and why.
That's the easy one. I'm staying out of that race. You choose who the best sheriff is. I can work with all 3 of them. I'll work well with either one. So that's my answer.
Fair question. Wants to know who we support for the Sheriff's Department. I've worked extensively with all 3 of those people for 20 years, with Shannon and Billy, crawling through the woods doing search warrants and working with him when I was the narcotics prosecutor here. John I've worked with very effectively as my counterpart in Grass Valley PD, and I think it would be inappropriate for me to put my finger on the scale of any one of those 3 people at this point. And
You're just going to have to go to a meeting where you all speak.
Yes.
And they got a quick breather, so yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
This is for Mr. Newell. You said you have a succession plan.
Could you stand up, please?
Oh, excuse me. You said you have a succession plan in place as far as who could be your next district attorney should you be reelected and then become a takeover. With the recent court trial hearing that's been going on and your assistant district attorney, Chris, when he's been in court and having Mr. Jennings as a witness, has taken it somewhat political. Is that a little bit of an ethics issue for that individual?
You asked me if I think that Chris Walth has an ethics issue or my office has an ethics issue. We did not take this case politically. This case was, for whatever reason, we don't drive the setting. This case seems to have come up at this very specific time for a specific reason, but we don't set. We've been trying to resolve these cases for the last 2 years, and it's no mystery to me. I think that was why they're there now. You're attacking the office, or many people are attacking, or the allegations made by the defense bar are attacking us. So we're simply going through the process. We're going to work it out. We've got these search warrants that are all the question, and I think by Friday is the last hearing date. The judge has ordered us to be done that date, and the following week we'll have a decision. And I'll wait, whatever it comes out. If I've done something wrong, I'm happy to accept that responsibility, but we haven't. And yes.
Is that in reading the paper, the articles in the paper from going in and observing the actual trial, there have been several comments made by Mr. Walsh that are a true political discussion trying to discredit your opponent, Mr. Jennings, and make you look like the right person. And that's my question. I'm sure you're aware of what he did.
Well, again, we'll wait till the end when it's all out there.
What the outcome of the case is going to be. It's how he handled it personally at the courthouse. And this is all from the newspaper twice, two separate instances.
First of all, I respect the paper for the job they do, but they're trying to condense 4 or 5 hours of testimony into a few inches a column. It just doesn't work. It's too complicated for that. And the person that writes those aren't legal professionals, so they're doing their best analysis of what they're presented with.
So you don't feel there were any questions that Mr. Walsh asked Mr. Jennings?
Well, I know at the end, it wasn't on the record. There was a comment made by Mr. Walsh to Munkelt, the defense attorney, if he was going to ask Mr. Jennings to apologize to Mr. Mackey. And so I think that's the comment you're talking about.
That's one of them.
Okay. That's a heated battle. These guys are trial prosecutors. And as far as my succession plan goes, I'm not picking any particular person for the office. Like I said, I'm trying to fill the office with people who, when it comes time and I'm gone in 4 years, that there will be people to step up and be able to move the office forward in whatever direction they want. And as we go, as part of the succession plan, as I'm developing my budget the last 2 years, I've involved these people heavily in what our goals and objectives are, where they want to see the office going, what kind of case management system do they want us to have. And so that's how I'm engaging them in taking over. And it's not a short process. And I think it's incumbent on me as the leader and the person now giving the office vision to start developing that ability in these youngsters. And so you'll have somebody come on and go for it.
So you're saying that you don't feel that any of the comments he made were ethically wrong?
I don't think there was an ethical problem with them, no.
May I respond? I was there.
Sounds like we're in court.
I was there, and I can tell you that was highly political on Mr. Walsh's part. He was bandstanding for the media, grandstanding for the media that was present. He placed a search warrant in front of me as an exhibit and asked me to read the last page. And I looked up and I asked the judge, I said, this is the sealed portion. Has the court order lifted its order sealing this? And nobody knew. Okay? And a week later, when I retook the stand, that warrant was presented to me again without the sealed portion. So Mr. Walsh didn't even know that portion was still sealed by the court. That's a complete rookie mistake. And lately, if you read the paper, this new second version of the warrant came out all of a sudden and surprised everybody, even the court, right? And they're jumping up and down. Look, this is proof. What that means is that Mr. Walsh, the ADA, was using the wrong search warrant for the last 3 or 4 weeks when he examined witnesses with it. Even he didn't know it was the wrong warrant. Another complete rookie mistake. Again, if that happened where I work, you would be demoted, if not let go. And that, again, comes from experience. He evidently is the most experienced person in that office. We know he doesn't try cases. He doesn't know how. And he won't do that. So the next most experienced person evidently is this Mr. Walsh, who's making these rookie mistakes. It's unbelievable. It's unimaginable that an ADA wouldn't know that he had the wrong warrant all those weeks and wouldn't know that the order's still in place, sealing part of an affidavit, asking me to read it in open court. Unbelievable. That won't happen with an experienced district attorney in charge. Okay? Yes.
Did he accuse you of lying?
Yes, he did. And talk about, I'm sorry.
I'm trying to get other people to be able to
I'm just
ask
trying to
questions.
follow up the final. That's
It,
my
it was
final.
extremely political. He immediately showed up and started quoting, hey, you know, you gave a speech at a candidates night, and I'm quoting, blah, blah, blah. Wouldn't show anybody else this video taken by the campaign manager of my opponent, but he would quote and say, are you lying? I mean, it was completely political. You know, the job of the prosecutor is to seek justice, because we carry a rather large hammer if we want to. We prosecute the guilty, but we also protect the innocent. And where our job is not to grandstand or act political in court, it's to seek justice. And that was set aside. The vision of that was set aside and lost by this district attorney's office because there's no leadership, there's no experience at the top. It's a rudderless ship, ladies and gentlemen. Okay?
I have a question that's totally different than any of the others.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Stand up now. We know that money talks. Can you each tell us who your largest contributor to your campaign is currently?
Currently, I am. I've recently got, my 460s are being filled out right now, and they will be on time in April when they come out. I think the biggest contributor at this point is Ernie Grossman out of Truckee. He gave me $500 last week. I've got several $99 checks, and I think when my reporting comes out, I'll have about $1,000 since my last report, additionally to the money I put into my campaign. I put my money where my mouth is.
I also am going to be the largest contributor. I'm going to move about $10,000 into it. I've received numerous checks. I got 3 tonight. I don't know what the amounts are. I haven't looked. The next highest one is by Kurt Chiddock, is $2,500. I got a $1,000 check from Mr. Freshke Construction. I've got numerous $500 checks, numerous $250 checks, $100 checks. I'm really grateful for that. Excuse me. But that's, I can't list them all for you. I don't know what all of them are. Okay?
You did one already. You did one.
Shame on you.
I'm Kathy Montiero, and I'm the director of CAUSE, Coalition of Animal Welfare and Support. And we have worked with D.A. Newell over the years. Before he became the district attorney, there wasn't an animal abuse case brought in court. I mean, for years and years and years. So because of that, and because he's been open to talking to us and listening to us, although not always doing what we would have hoped, we supported him, and we probably have a couple thousand supporters within the animal advocacy community. And I think that I came here tonight because I wanted to say that I really want to reach out to the ag community, because I see that there's like a divide there, and I don't think there needs to be. And I'd really like to have some communication going, and hopefully some.
Do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. So my question is, what we're really pushing for currently is that when you have a repeated offender, somebody who's been convicted of animal abuse, and they're coming up again, and if they get convicted again, there's a statute, or the code 571 says that they can be prohibited from owning animals in the future. And so I'm wondering what both of you, how you feel about implementing that statute with plea bargains, and how you could have that happen, if you believe that that's a good thing, with sentencing. Sorry, I'm shaking because I'm cold.
Thanks for the shout out there. I appreciate that. But it's 597. It's one of the code sections of 597, and we do that in every animal case. Some of it we don't always get it if they're early offenders, and it just depends on each case. I can't say a blanket statement. but any multiple offender has that prohibition on their as terms of their probation. And we've been doing that for a long time now, ever since it came out.
Yes, I've prosecuted animal abuse cases. Some of them were absolutely horrible. It involved horses that were left and they were starving. We always ask for the prohibition in cases like that. Again, we investigated those thoroughly. We filed felonies on those because they deserved them, and we stayed with the felonies. We didn't reduce them, and we got a probation report with the animal prohibition in those cases.
I have a question. This is more about kind of running the office. And I heard some things tonight that I would like to have maybe verified. And I think Mr. Newell did actually answer that question, that you don't prosecute cases.
Correct.
And so I just had a picture in my mind. I grew up, my dad was the DA in Butte County until we moved here when I was 11, and he was the prosecutor. You know, he tried the cases, the hard ones he took, and he mentored each of the prosecutors in the office. And so there was this tremendous camaraderie and respect. And it sounds like in Butte County there's still that kind of a organization that's going on. And I guess I have two questions. One is, how common is it to have a district attorney who is not necessarily prosecuting cases, but just acting as an administrator in the office? And I'd like to hear from both of you on this question, because this was a new idea to me. I just realized it tonight.
Sure.
And I also, I have a second part of that, and it has to do with this, you know, the turnover in the office. And I'd like to get both of your thoughts on whether or not maybe that lack of the mentor-mentee relationship might contribute to that turnover in the office.
Well, there's no. So if you're listening to my opponent, of course everything's bad in my office. There is a great collegiality in my office, and there is a lot of mentoring. I spend, part of that budget is set aside for training these guys. Every attorney in the office gets to go to a week-long training someplace else besides here, so they develop those relationships statewide, so they can pick up and talk to other prosecutors around the state. Those are really important. And then we have in-house training still. And anybody that wants, in the California District Attorneys Association, Sacramento has ongoing trainings that happen down there. And anybody in my office can sign up and go to as many of those as they want in a year. And we also have a passport for electronic training. So, and everybody's required to do a certain number of those a year at their desk during lunchtime or so. And as far as how is this the norm across the state? No, we've got 58 district attorneys' offices and 5 or 6 city attorneys' offices, and it varies throughout the state, depending on the size of the office, size of the resources, how your county's set up. The reason I didn't start taking cases when I stepped into the job as a district attorney, I had a lot of work that I felt had to do to get the office moving the way, to follow my vision. And then once you start down that path, and we went through 2009-10, when my budgets were dramatically impacted and I lost like 5 employees, suddenly all of that work that ran the office, where I didn't have assistants to do it, I didn't have people running around to do my work for me at the executive level. I did it myself. That's where like I said, I rolled up my sleeves and I learned how to do a budget and do bookkeeping, and I have a business background and a farm background, and then finally prosecution. And I think all of those things wrapped together make me the best candidate for the job. And all I can do is point to my accomplishments and how well I believe the office is running right now, and how well my staff are supporting us. So I think all in all, I'm still the best guy for the job, whether I prosecute a case or not. I do run the office well, and it's on all 8 cylinders, and we're making great progress. Thank you.
Okay. It's extremely rare for the elected official not to prosecute a case. I think you're absolutely right in your feeling there. Every office I've worked in, when a big case rolled through, the elected DA took that case and prosecuted. It creates camaraderie and it creates respect, because in every district attorney's office, and I got to repeat this, in every district attorney's office, there's an unwritten rule of respect. And the only way you get respect is if you go down there and prosecute cases. You can't buy respect, you can't scare them, okay? And in my office in Butte County, there's 30 prosecutors. It's a huge office. And Ramsey has no problem taking that big case when it rolls in. It takes the pressure off of us. He could easily hand it to me and have me do it with my other caseload, but he does it. Now, when my opponent won't handle a case, that creates a tremendous amount of pressure on the other prosecutors below him, because sometimes one case can take a tremendous amount of energy and a tremendous amount of time. So by him not handling anything for the last 12 years creates tremendous pressure. Remember 5 assistant DAs in 3 years? I submit to you that's part of the pressure. These people are going, wait a minute, the elected guy isn't handling any cases? This is a little weird for me. And they leave. Because I don't know about you, but if you're going to elect a district attorney, they got to at least know how to try a case. And they should try the big cases, the big murder cases. Because I think there was, what, 9 or 10 murders last year that happened up here?
No. Since 2014, there's been...
No, last year.
Last year,
Yeah.
in 2016, 2.
Yeah. 2017.
17, still 2.
Just 2 murders. Just taking one of those murder cases for yourself takes a tremendous burden off the rest of the prosecutors. So they can prosecute that dog case where somebody stole your dog. They're not too busy and they're not overwhelmed. And if you elect me, I'll handle some of those cases. I'll take that pressure off. Because that's what you would expect the elected district attorney to do. And every office I worked in, the elected district attorney always took that big high-profile case.
Well, I hate to interrupt this, but it's almost 5 minutes to 9.
And we're supposed to be out of here about 9 o'clock, they said. And so maybe one more question, you in the back there?
Well, this is related to what they were just saying. So Mr. Newell, you say that they can go down somewhere and get training. What impact does them having to go down and get the training away from the office, whereas I'm hearing in most offices they can get the training right there in the office? What impact does that have on your budget?
Well, that's not the case throughout the state. The district attorneys, almost every district attorney sends their people to the statewide trainings at various times. We cycle them through so we don't, impact our budgets too much because it is expensive. But it's a super important training to have, whatever they happen to be, and it's usually in specialized fields where we don't get it here. We get the subject matter experts from throughout the state and actually throughout the country that teach our prosecutors that have special caseloads, homicide prosecutions and child molestation cases. And so it's critical to send these people to those trainings. As far as the impact on the rest of the office, again, there's a lot of camaraderie in my office, and when somebody's out, we all work with our schedules. We back each other up in court. You set up, I'm going to be gone for a week, and I don't set any cases on that week for myself, and somebody else marshals the ones that have to go to court for you till you get back. It's pretty simple to do, and it's a very critical component for the longevity of the office.
Can I just follow up on that? I think what my opponent's talking about is we have a required number of units we have to take, educational units called MCLE. So every 3 years we have to have 25 of those units. So that's why we send prosecutors to these classes, because they get those units. What I'm talking about, that happens in every district attorney's office. But what I'm talking about is an experienced prosecutor in the office, so that when one of your folks is trying a case down there and they come back during lunch or at the end of the day going, I just got hit with this issue, how do I handle it? He's not going to know how to answer that. I will. I've got over 100 jury trials, murder cases and everything. I can help those folks. I can help them immediately when they need the help. They don't have to get on the phone and call their friends somewhere and try to get information from them. And that's what I mean by having an experienced DA. They can answer those questions there.